The US is pushing more stringent measures against the Chinese tech firm Huawei. Huawei has been controversial for years, but could this new trade conflict negatively impact the tech industry? Should the free market allow Huawei to operate around the world? All this today on the Tonic Accord podcast. Hey, everybody, and welcome back to the Tonic Accord podcast. I'm Alex Kapitko, joined by my friend and co-host Drew Nepley. Drew, how's it going?
Hello. Going good this Memorial Day weekend. Staying socially distanced, but I may try and get outside and maybe I'll do a little fishing as long as I'm abiding by the rules because, that's what Memorial Weekend is for, memorializing our veterans and also getting outside and barbecuing and all that fun stuff.
Yeah, that was my next question. You got to hopefully you're still going to barbecue. I hope that the whole pandemic isn't going to stop that because I feel like that's American tradition. And I've been seeing on, Instagram and stuff. I'm over here in Spain and we don't celebrate it, and I'm kind of jealous a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, hey, I might have maybe it'll be a Chinese takeout, but the spirit will be there.
There we go. Well, today I want to talk about the United States, China, Huawei, and kind of maybe the foreseeable future of a worse divorce, I guess, between China and the United States, because I think as we've seen for the last, 2 years under the Trump administration, the administration's been trying to curb China's growth around the world. And now on May 15th, the U.S. decided to try a different tactic. They are targeting Huawei's in-house microchips by saying that no American companies can be used and no American tools can be used in making Huawei products. And this is a huge action because it's kind of trying to cut all the middlemen out of Huawei. And I'm concerned personally, just to put it out there, that this might cause a conflict inside of the tech world and maybe could cause a backlash on firms like Apple and Google and some of these big companies that are in the United States. And I don't know, it might hurt the relationship of the United States and China going forward, which is already decoupling. So what are your thoughts on this kind of growing issue?
We're certainly gonna if we start engaging in all these sanctions against Huawei and blocking them from the markets, there's certainly going to be an economic hit. I mean, it'll be harder to get various materials and supplies, whether you're Huawei, harder to get American-made goods or American-made microchips, or vice versa, right? Harder to do business with, if you're AT&T, you can't sell Huawei phones, right? So it does put a limit on the market, and it does probably stifle a little bit of economic activity. But I think it's worth it because of serious national security concerns, and this whole China trade war thing, right, is definitely a product of the current administration. But our concerns with Huawei go back a while. There have been legal battles from U.S. companies against Huawei for various things like stealing ideas and stealing research as far back as 2000. So, U.S. companies have their own concerns with Huawei, and this has been going on for 20 years now. And so I think it's escalating. It certainly is escalating now. But I think it might be worth looking into. I mean, there's some serious allegations about Huawei that are very concerning. The fact that one is they made a shell company to do deals with Iran. And that's one of the major reasons they're kind of in hot water right now, is because the U.S. when you do business with the United States, we basically say, if you want to do business with us, you can't do business with North Korea and you can't do business with Iran. So Huawei, in order to get around that, formed a shell company. They said they sold it off. They said they had no control over this whatsoever, that was doing business in Iran. Turns out it was basically just a proxy, and that's caused a lot of concern. So, I would argue that Huawei is a bad actor, and the reason they shouldn't be allowed into our free markets is because they're not playing by the rules.
Completely agree. I think that was really well said, and there's nothing I could disagree on with you there. I mean, the problem is, and I've been telling this for years, because living here in Europe, I mean, I would say probably a third of the people I see, maybe even 50% of the people I see on the street have Huawei phones.
Wow.
Like they're very popular in Spain, in the UK, Germany. I mean, most of the EU. And I saw that companies like Vodafone, which I actually use as my phone provider, are hooked up to the growing 5G network with Huawei. So
Right.
that was a little concerning for me. But it's true that it's a prevalent company, and they have some serious issues because this is not your typical private sector industry. And before we go much further, I kind of just want to talk about the beginnings of Huawei because I think it's instrumental and illustrative of kind of where they came from and why it's a controversial and kind of, in my opinion, a very sinister company in some ways. Ren Zhengfei is a former People's Liberation Army officer who founded the company in 1987. And since then, obviously, the company has become a huge juggernaut. And this basically happened because of a lot of assistance and central bank funding from the Chinese Communist Party and the Chinese government. So, like, right off the bat, it's very clear, right, that Huawei is not just a public company, but it's also in some ways an arm of the Chinese government.
Right.
And that to me, and obviously to American intelligence, and I think most intelligence, especially in the West, is that that's concerning, especially considering that they want to start a 5G network that is involved in car driving, automation, social media, pretty much the entire infrastructure of our day-to-day lives. And this is a company that is run by a country in some ways that doesn't support human rights or freedom of press.
Yeah, I mean, look, I mean, and that's a major concern. Like even maybe less related to semiconductors and chips, but the popular app TikTok, like that's owned by a Chinese company, and there are people that are concerned about what does that mean if there's millions and millions of Americans that have a Chinese company owned app on their phone? Like, are they tracking that? Are they using how much information are they getting from our phones? Are they taking that to the government? And of course, China has denied, no, we would never, ever use our, private company apps to spy on other. But it's like any national security expert will tell you, you can't take that at face value, right? Of course, you can't just trust what the Chinese government says about censorship and espionage. Like, you'd be stupid to. Yeah. So of course, there is a possibility and a probability, I would say, that China would use something like TikTok or use something like Huawei phones to get information on other people around the world, to spy on the United States. I think it's pretty logical, and frankly, the United States government agrees with me, right? This is what our national security apparatus is saying, is that Huawei is engaging in espionage. The Chinese government is using private firms to, as what you said, as an extension of their espionage apparatus, and this is a serious concern. And the United States is not alone in this, right? The UK and Australia are also kind of waking up to hey, maybe we shouldn't be so accepting of Chinese private companies into our everyday tech society.
Yeah, definitely. And that's kind of what I've seen in especially Europe, is that I think a lot of countries early on were kind of gung-ho to go along with Huawei because, it's a flashy deal. I mean, Huawei, at least from what I've heard, obviously I've never owned a Huawei phone. It's quite difficult to get in the US, but they have cameras that I've heard are better than Apple cameras. They have systems that are better, and it's a sleek, nice phone. And I think a lot of European infrastructure thought that this would benefit them highly, bringing in these 5G networks and also utilizing Huawei in their country. But later on, I think they're starting to wake up to the fact that, wait a second, our national intelligence community is telling us that maybe there's some issues here. And what you said, I totally agree with, because the Council on Foreign Relations had an interesting piece just on the three reasons why Huawei is bad, not only for the United States, but for a lot of countries. And, one was cyber espionage, like you said, where the FBI basically calls it undetected espionage. And I think it was good that you mentioned TikTok, because it's very similar. It's something that, it's not directly spying on you, but it's those back programs in their programs that are, gathering data, and it's kind of horrifying.
Right.
And like the second one is obviously intellectual property theft. There were two cases back in the early 2000s, Cisco and then T-Mobile, who both had sued Huawei for allegedly stealing their source code. And this is nothing new, right? A lot of Chinese tech has been convicted of, or not convicted, but called out for doing that, right? And then the third was trade violations, like you said about Iran, where that kind of came to the forefront in Canada in early 2019 when the chief financial officer was arrested and tried to be extradited to the United States, right, for defraud.
Meng Wanzhou, right?
Exactly. Yeah. And And yeah, I think there's a lot of very important concerns there, and it does, like you said, it does seem like the world's opening up and waking up to that. And I think that's why we're slowly seeing this backlash. And like I've said from day one, I support some of Trump's views on China, though I don't always support how they're carried out. And to me, actually, some of this makes sense in trying to strangle the beast with Huawei. I don't know if it's going to work, but I understand the motives.
I agree. I mean, I've expressed before that China is a waking beast that we have to address. Again, for all the listening now, we're talking about the Chinese government, right? The Chinese government we're not talking about the people of China, but we're talking about the government of China, the massive government, and its overreaching power over all its private companies, quote unquote private companies. So yeah, I mean, I'm with the Department of Defense, and I'm with the federal government in their concerns about Huawei and about China's government in general, and how they're not really playing fair. Like, you have to remember, right, when we talk about a free market, we're not talking about anarchy. Free market is not anarchy. Free market has rules, property laws, intellectual property laws, copyright laws. There's a ton of government supported institutional laws that create what we call the free market. But it's not like this anarchy, super anarchic supply demand thing. When we talk about the modern free world and the modern free market, there's rules that you have to abide by, and that legal battles are fought over. And it's very apparent that these Chinese firms are not playing by these rules, and it's led to lawsuits. And now, like you mentioned, the Meng Wanzhou, or also known as Kathy Meng, who is a Chinese as well as Canadian resident, is the daughter of the founder of Huawei, and she was living in I think Vancouver for years, multi-million-dollar homes in Canada. But yeah, the Mounties arrested her last year, and she was to be extradited to the United States. And this year in February, the U.S. criminal charges came out, like the official indictment came out, and the unsealed U.S. indictment alleged a decades-long effort to steal trade secrets from American companies, that Huawei and its proxies conspired to misappropriate intellectual property. She lied to the HSBC Bank, and if proven guilty, she could face up to 10 years imprisonment. That's serious stuff. That's serious charges for the CFO of Huawei. So, when you have that happening right now, the CFO of Huawei, being indicted by the U.S. government, it is a worrying that other countries are just allowing this company to then just set up 5G apparatuses and sell, like you said, like you noticed that almost half the people who walk around Spain have Huawei phones. And their CFO is indicted on lying and stealing trade secrets. Like, I think the next step, and we'll get into some of the exact steps that the U.S. is taking right now to combat Huawei, but I would argue that one that needs to be happening is we need to bring other people into the fold. We need to get, not just the U.K. and Australia, but we need to get Europe, France, Germany, Spain. Like, everyone needs to be on board of like, hey, Huawei is a bad actor, and it is not playing by the rules that we think we've set up for them.
Yeah, and kind of bouncing off that, the interesting part of that Council on Foreign Relations piece was talking about Huawei's growth. And it kind of sounds like it was a factor, a myriad of factors, but it was kind of A, cheating the system and stealing intellectual property, which is check for breaking the rules of free trade in the international order that we're in. But B, they got huge sums of money from the Chinese Development Bank and the Export-Import Bank. So they were literally propped up by the government as an apparatus. Excuse me. But then also third, because of this, they basically were able to outcompete established firms such as Nokia and Ericsson, who were trying to provide the same amount of services. And so a lot of people think that one way that we could try to combat this is by trying to help companies like Nokia and Ericsson, who are working inside of the system that we've created and are following the rules, and also have quite good 5G technology coming out of it. And that's the problem, is that China's kind of displaced some of these firms that were actually trying to do the right thing. And so a lot of economists, especially in the United States, have said, well, why don't we help some of these companies and not completely prop them up, but why don't we support them, invest in them, to try to outweigh what Huawei's doing? And I think that could be interesting.
Absolutely. I mean, that's a great thing. You know, South Korean and Japanese and American companies that have been playing by the rules that are established in the tech industry. Yeah, we should maybe advocate them to be, right, invest in their 5G apparatuses. My worry is that like the United States, we can afford to say no Huawei phones. You're going to buy Samsung, you're going to buy Google Pixel, you're going to buy Apple, but you're not going to buy Huawei phones. Well, I think we're in a country that can easily do that, right? I mean, I haven't felt like I've missed out by not being able to buy a Huawei phone in the marketplace. And we're a wealthier nation in general. I worry about, that whole discussion back to the Belt and Road, right? The more vulnerable countries that might take a deal with China in Africa or Latin America. I worry about them not having the bargaining power to say no to Huawei, because China might be like, hey, remember that freeway we did? Also let us bring in our 5G apparatus. Like, these countries that have already said yes to one project from the Chinese government may not have the bargaining power to say no to Huawei. Do you know what I mean? So I think that it's super important that the United States has to go to these developing countries and like you said, bring support with our own tech infrastructures. Now, that being said, I can also see how some people might accuse the United States of doing the same thing, because I'm sure many people are also equally scared of the United States' espionage apparatus, because we definitely have the largest.
Yeah, and that's a fair elephant in the room, And back to the China's Belt and Road Initiative thing you said, I completely agree with you, and I think that's the alarming and kind of terrifying part of it, is that you are going to have a percentage of the world that are going to subscribe to this and are going to go along with it. I mean, Russia's clearly done it. Malaysia has said the country will use Huawei's technology. India has. And the problem is that it's estimated that Huawei's system is 30% less expensive than the competitors. So at the end of the day, the price tag is going to be flashy to countries that don't have these extra bucks.
Yeah. I was gonna say, it's the Walmart problem, right? It's like, is Walmart the most ethically sourced way to get your products and goods? No. But is it the cheapest and most convenient? Yes. And does it happen to be sourced by China? Yes. Huawei is becoming this Walmart, and it's like, but it's even more unethical. It's a Walmart that's spying on you for the government.
Yeah, that's actually an amazing comparison. It's really true. You don't go to Walmart usually, and I'm not trying to disparage any people that like Walmart, but you don't usually go there out of your love for Walmart. You go there out of necessity. That's
right.
True. That's very true. And yeah, the other thing I was going to say is that The Economist had a good point on kind of going back to now the superconductors and the current issue, is that by the U.S. now trying to force the companies not to use any Huawei products, this could kind of cause some issues for the United States on the PR scale, because even though, like we've said, a lot of Western governments are wary of China, they don't really want to be told where they can do business either.
Sure.
And so that kind of creates, at least on paper and on the image basis, it kind of creates a bad setup. And I mean, honestly, like also on the superconductors, the problem is like going into what the US is doing right now. I think from what I'm seeing in 2019, Huawei's revenue has been rising consistently, and it's already up 20% into 2020.
Yeah.
And they have a firm called TSMC in Taiwan and another one, SMIC in China, which are no longer using any American products and are highly supplying Huawei. So it basically seems like China's such a big country with so many resources that clearly they will be fine.
Yeah, again, I think it's the international markets, right? It's the global markets, right? China will always be fine in its own little domain as far as its own companies, because like we said, they're government propped up, they're inflated, all the monetary manipulation, but it's similar to the idea of like the battle of ideologies. It's the battle of tech influence is now kind of almost tied into it, and how we deal with that as it spreads across the international world. Now, I do think we are taking some good steps. I mean, recently we've tried to more target exactly where we can, hit those weak points in Huawei's infrastructure, and one is this chip juggernaut, HiSilicon. We took aim at the company HiSilicon's chip division. This company has become central. This is based off of a Reuters report. This HiSilicon company has become a central part of China's ambitions in semiconductor technology. But part of that semiconductor company, HiSilicon, has to use American products, and we've just eliminated that option. And so, like, let's see, right here, it's like this one little caveat. Yes, so they use design software from U.S. firms Cadence Design Systems and Synopsys Inc. So it's, Chinese HiSilicon making the chips, but the software to get there, they're using American companies. And we've just now eliminated that usage, right? So they can't use those companies. And so actually HiSilicon, which was making chips on par with Apple, might not have the ability to do that for now. Of course, they're going to obviously be trying to find a workaround and find another option. But we've actually just recently limited their ability to make high quality semiconductor chips on par with Apple and on par with Intel and stuff. And so, it's a serious blowback. And Huawei even said, our survival is at stake. Now, they might be playing that up for the PR, of course, right? Like we talked about. But, we are taking shots. Our government is definitely taking shots and taking action, and I think that's good, right? We can't just sit here and be like, hey, Huawei, you need to play by the rules, and then not actually do anything about it. We need to be actually doing something about it, and I think this is one way to do it, which is, hey, you can't make these nice semiconductor chips with American products if you're just going to go turn around and use it to spy on us or spy on other countries.
Yeah, that's a really good point, and I think you're right that at least. I mean, I think there's the difference in this issue between the short and the long term, because I think at least in the short term, it is going to help slow down the beast. Though I personally do not think it's going to in the long run hurt Huawei that much. Just mainly because I remember back in 2018 reading a piece that was about this growing battle between the U.S. and China on basically just consolidating silicon. And it was kind of talking about this growing concern that both Obama and now Trump have had to deal with on how are we going to be able to control these markets. And
right.
And my big issue is that, yes, while this company that you've mentioned is going to have some setbacks, what was it?
HiSilicon.
Yes, yeah. HiSilicon. So they'll be set back, but this SMIC, which is based in Hong Kong and mainland China as well, they've raised over $2 billion this year already from state investors. And so my problem is that, yes, this will slow down Huawei, but they have the apparatus, and I think they're just gaining clout in non-Western areas enough, because the Economist this week had also said that the problem is like, what do you do when the biggest semiconductor firms only make up 20% of their sales in America,
right?
And only 20% of the plants are actually on U.S. soil. So yes, you're solving this small problem, but then what are you going to tell these giant multinational companies doing it outside of the U.S. that may operate for both us and China?
Yes, and exactly like that point about HiSilicon, right? Now that Huawei is having issues with that HiSilicon company because we blocked their U.S. software. Now Huawei is saying, well, maybe we ditch HiSilicon chips and we go with Samsung chips, which is a Korean company. So that exactly shows the point of, yes, so, you stop one thing, but they're going to look to other options, of course. So that's why it is, my main point is this whole battle against Huawei has to be international, and we have to start influencing our allies or even just periphery states, right? So if HiSilicon is now with crappy software because we blocked the US software and they want to go to Samsung, we should also be talking to Samsung and being like, yo, what can we do to make sure that you don't go with Huawei? What can we do that you don't sell your chips? How can we support, I don't know enough about the intricacies of the tech industry to offer something to Samsung so they don't go to Huawei. You know what I mean? I don't know nearly enough about that business, but I would hope that when we see that, okay, we block one avenue for Huawei, now they're going to the other door, we at least are also in that other door talking to them, being like, hey, how can we avoid you letting Huawei in? Because this is a serious. Like, I have to imagine that China is going to use all of this tech stuff for spying and espionage, and again, like the idea that Huawei, because Huawei claims we would never let our stuff be used by the Chinese government. The idea that that they would say no to the Chinese government if for a request for information is ridiculous, and even then, that even allows them the notion that they have the option. I don't even think they have the option. I think it's pretty much a one-to-one. What Huawei gets, the Chinese government gets as well.
Yeah, and I mean, just to answer that question, that Council on Foreign Relations actually mentioned right in it, the National Security Law of 2015 and the same one of 2017 state that citizens and enterprises have the responsibility and obligation to maintain national security and interests.
Right.
And then it also says that the Chinese companies must support, assist, and cooperate with China's intelligence gathering authorities. So right there, they can say what they want to do, but if the Chinese government wants information on someone, they are going to get it, especially if it's with a Huawei phone. And I've I've heard Spanish people and other Europeans when they like when I've sat down and this conversation has come up over the dinner table or over drinks at a pub or something. I've always, I mean, for years I've been critical of China and Huawei, and they all say, well, no, Huawei is just bad for the U.S. I mean, Apple and Google do the same thing. And I'm like, no, that's incorrect because, yes, there are privacy violations that Google and Apple conduct on a daily basis, but Apple will not, and we've seen it on case and case again, they will not give their information to the authorities, even in times when maybe they should. And that's the big difference to me is these are companies, I mean, Google is trying to get your information in a total free market sense, at least in my opinion, to sell your information to potential advertisers. And that is not what Huawei is doing.
Right, yeah. There's a very big difference between I'm using your browsing data to sell to automated advertisers so that they can do targeting. Like, you may not like it, right? But then, you can also choose a different browser. That's very different. Like you said, that's very different than Huawei using your data and information to then tell the Chinese government and have it put in their espionage apparatus. That is a very different thing than an advertiser trying to sell you a blender because you searched smoothies last night. So yes, and I agree. And but that is that is a problem I think we're gonna have in this battle is. The United States is telling you, hey, China's a big bad government that's going to spy on you. And everyone around the world is going to be like, yeah, aren't you also that same thing? And in many cases, the United States is. I mean, the whole problem with NSA and Edward Snowden when we were spying on our allies. So I do understand that argument of like, why like, oh, you're so concerned about spying on us from China now when you've been doing it for years. And it sucks that the U.S. has that history, but it still doesn't mean that we're wrong when we say it's bad that China's spying on you, right? And again, that notion you mentioned that it's only going to be a problem for the United States. That so misses the big global picture and the global colliding of titans that we've been talking about for so long. We are really entering in I think we're going to be entering in a power dynamic for who's the next hegemony. And it's going to be fought with stuff like this. It's going to be fought with tech apparatuses and influence over economies. It's not going to be fought with AK-47s and M16s.
Yeah, exactly. And I think you have a really good point about how the U.S. unfortunately has used sinister means of surveillance. My opinion on it is not popular, and I'm sure someone's going to call me out on it. But the one thing I would say is that I think the U.S. overused and maybe overreached their ability to spy on citizens and international allies. But you have to think that in some abstract sense, it was for the betterment and the protection of what we think of as our personal rights and our social contract, even if we were breaching it in the process. But what China's doing is they've kind of given a playbook for authoritarians on how to spy on your citizens and almost create a social identity that can maybe limit your mobility in society and your ability to actually have rights. And that's the difference where I would say is that I don't support what the NSA has done. We talked about it last week even. But I do, again, think there are differences. But
yes,
that's
of course.
Obviously a whole other discussion. But I also do have to ask you, so just like in the big picture now, what do you think this does to I guess we could call it divorce between China and the United States? Does this make things even more worse? I don't know if that's a word. Worse? Yeah.
I mean, I look, I mean, I think it's ripping off a Band-Aid, right? It's going to hurt. This whole trade war, again, combined with the COVID pandemic, forcing people to change supply routes, crazy, who knows where the economy is going to be in 6 months or a year. But I do think that, this whole, it's ripping off the Band-Aid of interdependency on China, and it's going to hurt a little bit. We've mentioned that. Tech firms that do a lot of business with China, with all these new regulations, with all these legal battles, it's going to stifle production. It's going to stifle economic activity. That's just going to happen. But that's that pain of ripping off the Band-Aid. I think it's a necessary pain that we might have to just weather in order to make sure that we have a fair and, frankly, a nationally secure tech industry. So yeah, I mean, it might hurt, and it might Intel or whatever and Huawei might hurt for a couple years, but hopefully we take the actions to, one, keep support American tech companies, and two, try to maintain our influence with them around the world more so than Huawei is. And obviously easier said than done. And again, back to the discussion quickly on the the NSA and everything. Yeah, that's we could go down that rabbit hole of who's done worse espionage. But my point my point is only that it's a valid criticism from foreigners that if we are we are going to have trouble telling people, hey, don't trust the Chinese government because they'll spy on you, when we've done the same thing in a different way and in a different light, sure, but maybe not everyone will see that or thinks that. So yeah, it's just a bummer that we're going to have a tough battle convincing people to trust us over China. But that battle is going to be consistent in every single way, I think, for the next 50 years at least. It's going to be, do you trust the United States more? Or do you trust China more for whatever, your freeways, your tech, your influence, your blah, blah, blah?
Yeah, no, and I think that's a really good point. And that's probably why the people I was talking to in a Spanish pub about this also said it's a problem for the U.S. because I think a lot of Europeans, though, they probably connect with the United States more than China. There is that memory of the post 9/11 world,
right?
That is still fresh in everyone's heads. And on, I kind of just, I guess, to kind of start wrapping this up, my big concern going forward, though, in the United States is that the Trump administration has kind of been just gung-ho with bringing in any expert, not even an expert, just anyone who is critical of China. And my issue is that we need to, like you said, have a strategic plan on what to do.
Right.
We don't want someone like Peter Navarro, one of his economic advisors, who just hates China. And a lot of his things he says are not even factual. We need to have a strategic and pragmatic response. And I'm worried that because Trump is trying to go after China so full-heartedly, we're going to get some bad actors in there, and it could just politicize this more when it shouldn't be.
Yes. And again, I also think it's at a time when we're also alienating ourselves from our allies. Maybe not so much recently, right? Because we've heard less talk about the whole Mexico, Canada, an American deal thing kind of passed by. We solved that eventually, but there was tumultuous things about Canadian steel and all that. But yeah, so maybe less so recently, but still, I think overall, America is at odds with its own trade partners while trying to at the same time be at odds with China as its trade partner. And I don't think that we should do both at the same time. I think we should focus on China because I think China is the more important problem we're going to have in the long term of economic trade in the world and just influence. And we should just maybe, even if it's what Trump calls a bad deal, maybe just make sure that our trade alliances with, more pro-Western states are strong, because then we can have influence to avoid Huawei putting 5G all over the world. We want to put American or Western or European or even, Korean 5G. I mean, I'd way more trust a Korean 5G apparatus like Samsung than I would Huawei. But my point is only that, yeah, you're right, that Trump is a little too gung-ho as far as attacking our own partners and China at the same time, and I don't think that's smart.
Exactly, I completely agree, and yeah, we're gonna have to watch this, but it's gonna be interesting because I think that there's not always a good deal. Sometimes deals aren't great,
Sure.
and marriage is always easier than divorce, and I think that's kind of what we're gonna be seeing between the U.S. and China, is that there are gonna be some losers on both sides.
Yeah, it's certainly interesting, and I mean, hey. I've never used a Huawei phone, so I don't know if they're even good, right? Like, have you ever are they even actually good phones?
All I know is that I sometimes read up on tech and I listen to podcasts where people have talked about it. I know Joe Rogan's had some experts who have talked about Huawei, and apparently their cameras are better than iPhones, and their technology, their actually processing speed is either equivalent or sometimes better than Apple products. So I mean,
right.
that's why they're cheaper and they're potentially maybe better, and that's the problem.
Yeah, well, we'll see how long that lasts. Because again, the reason
Yeah.
the processing with the high silicon, now that they don't have the U.S. software, maybe they won't be as fast. But again, we'll
Yeah.
have to see. Again, a lot of complex stuff, especially when you start talking about semiconductors and computing. You start to get into a world that's a little jargon heavy. But
Out of our pay grade.
yeah. But yeah, you wanna close this one off, Alex?
All right. Well, as always, please let us know what you think. Comment, tell your friends, criticize us if you think. We'd love to hear your opinions. And as always, we're on YouTube, Podbean, Apple Podcasts, iTunes. I'm still working on Spotify, but I got to change over the file type of our catalog first. But yeah, keep listening, and thanks for joining us today.
Thank you, everyone. Take care.